How's it going, YouTube? Coming to today with another video, and today guys, the video is going to be how to deck build post Cyac, and I'm very excited to bring you this video because today we have a very unique opportunity. We can look at deck building from a whole different approach. What happens when you can't use Dark Ruler tactics to break a board? You can't push through a board with those. You can't even use Prosperity to set up your own board, which is pretty crazy. But let me tell you what. You can set up a nice hand trap lineup and some cool tech cards to mitigate boards, and then if you do get Dark Rulered, prevent your opponent from putting up their big board, and at that point you can go ahead and kill right back through Dark Ruler on your own board. So I think that's really cool, and there's a lot of different ways you can go ahead and talk about Super Heavy Samurai, because you can't even play Sekka's Light like we saw back in Emancipator with the huge monster pile deck, because you can't activate your scales or equip cards from your hand, so that card's already written off, but there are a lot of other really cool cards you can play instead. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over Imperium Duelist, Dragon Shield, or Gem, definitely go ahead and do so down in the description below. And then also a gigantic shout out to Main Phase. If you haven't already checked them out, definitely go down in the description below, click their link. They're sponsoring today's giveaway with 2 individual Anbu border sleeves, and I'm very excited to give these away again to 2 different individuals. So subscribe to the channel and then comment down below what your favorite deck is post Cyac. I'll be announcing the 2 winners for this giveaway in 48 hours. So definitely go ahead and comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and let's hop right into our first topic. The first thing I want to talk about is going to be just super heavy in general. This is the deck that came out of nowhere, something that we never thought would be meta. Again, it's just such a crazy idea to not use spells and traps, right? But the amount of extenders and one-card combos and searchers that we got in the new set is actually just absurd, and really does allow this deck to push ahead quite far. Yes, you can't use spells and traps, but there are other ways that you can look at the deck. And the number one way that you can is the fact that we have so many starters now. Now, I know that Monk Warrior is in the starter category, even though it's not a starter, but you have to play it for the other starters, so I just included it anyways, because Prodigy is insane, and then you really need to have this so you can actually use this. And then this card, of course, is just a free search too, so really absurd card as well. But you have so many different ways to just start your combo off, through Piercer, through Wagon, through your Bike, through your Prodigy. And then again, Droll is definitely a problem in this format, and sometimes in really awkward hands, you kind of have to pick a hand trap and play through it, because you can't play through every hand trap. So a lot of times I just try to find the hand trap that's going to let me put up the biggest board at that point, because you just lose to any of them. So you just try to find the one that puts you in like the worst situation and play around that one. And I think that Droll almost always puts you in the worst situation. You can still put up like Baguska or Baron sometimes through a Droll, but you really want to make sure that you have a level 2 in the graveyard, so you at least have a line for Baron. But if you have Bike in the graveyard, then you have Baguska or Baron, because you have the level mod effect, so that's really cool too. And then if you hard open even like Peacemaker, then you can go ahead and summon Scales from deck as well. So there's a lot of ways you can go about it. I really do like Bike though as your first starter, because if you drop Bike, a lot of times your opponent's just not going to hit you with Droll immediately, because they want to be able to play around Gamma. So it's really nice too if you're able to go into your Prodigy right after that, because you can summon Prodigy, then you can activate Monk Warrior, and then Monk Warrior can search for even like a Peacemaker, and so at that point you're able to at least put up a Baron or a Baguska. So just a couple things that you can do through a Droll, or at least playing around a Droll. So definitely something just to keep in mind. But as far as a 1-card starter goes, I think this is really nice, because this actually just kind of mitigates the problem of not being able to play consistency cards like other Rotas in spell form, because at that point you're just playing a ton of Rotas in the deck, so you don't really have to worry about not playing like any kind of spells for it. But at the same time, it's a little difficult if you can't even like punish your opponent for hand trapping you with talents. That's why it's always really free to hand trap this deck too, because you know that you're not going to get talented, right? So that's definitely really interesting. And then a lot of times if you're playing super heavy and your opponent's being like real calm, they probably have a Dark Ruler in hand, so you got to be able to make that read too whenever you're setting up your board. But just a couple things to think about. So as far as extenders go, you have a few that you can play. I really do like Peacemaker. I played 2 of this because, again, it's the card that just lets you play through Droll. You can either set up Baguska or Baron. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this card. Again, just even if the Droll isn't there, then you're allowed to just go ahead and summon Scales, bring back the Piercer. And if you're on Ballista, then you can go ahead and go into a Ballista really quickly. The Piercer gets a search, search Gearbox, search Tunneler, so you can kind of get your engine rolling really quickly. The Scales is really good because you can at least summon it if your opponent goes first to your board if they control 2 or more monsters, and that way you get a reborn as well. The Soul Guy is really good just because anything that it equips to is a tuner at that point. Then it also can just free summon itself, as well as the Spy can free summon itself. So a lot of really cool extenders in the deck that, again, it's not exactly talents, but it does help you push through a lot of the negation that you could be playing against, or some of the boards that can be a little more wild. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be utility. Now, utility is going to be whatever you want it to be in the deck, but I think that in forms of utility in a deck like this, you really want to find cards that give you something else in the deck that you're missing, right? So we don't have a really good way in Speller Traps to really be able to recycle our resources. So having a card like Tunneler that allows you to recycle your resources. And not only that, if you play against anything like super random, let's say you play against like Trap Tricks and they hit you with like Floodgate Trap Hole and Book of Moon, your Soul Piercer. I've had games where this goes face down, then I just use this in my hand and tribute the Soul Piercer, summon out the Tunneler, and then you get the effect of Soul Piercer, and then you can keep on going. So overall, a really cool extender, and then also a Pot of Avarice, which is really important for the deck because you can put back all the cards that you need, draw 2 more, and then you have a lot of hand traps or follow-up for the next turn. And then last but not least, Regulus, again, just adding another layer of negation to the deck that you really do need. And not only is it negation, it's follow-up because you equipped a Soul Piercer. So if your opponent is able to break your board, you're still able to get even more follow-up on top of what you already have. Usually you're going back into your turn with like 6 or 7 cards, which is already pretty nuts, especially because if you're in your turn and you want really good follow-up, you're usually adding like a Prodigy, so that's already 1 summon. You get the Soul Piercer effect right there, so you can go ahead and add even like a Wagon if you want, so you get another summon. That's another card they have to interact with on the board. You can just grab like a Bike, so then the Bike can go ahead and grab the Scales that you just recycled, so you can just Cyber Dragon it to the board and keep going. You can grab a Peacemaker. There's just so many different ways that you can interact in this deck that really does go a long way as far as follow-up, because there's a lot of cards that just say free summon on them, and that's really hard to play through sometimes for your opponent. But talking about hand trap lineups now, I think this is even more important to talk about because of the fact that you know that if you get Dark Rooted, you need some kind of answer to at least be able to slow your opponent down. So having cards like Droll, this is always going to be one of those cards that mitigates a board enough to where your opponent can't just put up a gigantic board and be able to make it to where you're in an impossible game state the next turn, right? But having Droll really does mitigate a board, so there's only going to be very minimal things that happen. Maybe there's like a huge Zeus, or your opponent goes like Baguska, but that's a lot more manageable than dealing with like a 4 or 5 negate board, right? So definitely really cool. Ash Blossom, something that you kind of have to play. You don't have to play it, but it's still very generically good, so I think that it's worth to play. And then, of course, Ogre. Ogre is just so nuts. There's so many things that you can hit with Ogre in this format. And if you don't know exactly where to Ogre, definitely go to my last where to hand trap video, check it out, and you'll be able to find out exactly the correct spots to Ogre. And then last but not least, if they do completely clear your board, you do have Gamma. So that's where Piercer at Bike is really cool, because if they think that you like need the Bike search, or if you use like Prodigy and they want to Ogre you, then you can punish with Gamma on the follow-up turn. Or if your opponent's on like Math Mech or what have you, right? Then they go like Heat Soul Draw, you can punish with Gamma. There's a lot of different things that you can go ahead and use Gamma for, which is really nice. This format is going to be the format of playing around Gamma and Droll, so keep that in mind because both of those cards are really prominent. Talking about the final build in the last couple of cards here. So I'm main decking Kurakara. I think Kurakara is super insane. If your opponent standby phase draws with Noir, then you can go ahead and just Kurakara tribute it. There's a lot of situations where your opponent kind of has to play into Kurakara. Whether it be like a Quem effect, if your opponent is using like a Mirror Jade on you, if you're playing against the mirror match and they have to use like Baron, if they have to use Oppo, there's a lot of situations where Kurakara just auto wins, and if you don't just auto win, you can reborn Baron, right? You can reborn Regulus. Like there's a lot of really cool things that you can summon back. My favorite is that you can actually just reborn your opponent's Ghost Ogre and then just use it from the field because the Ghost Ogre is so good. So Kurakara, definitely a mainstay in that main deck. Highly recommend it. I know it's kind of expensive, but if you have them, I definitely recommend main decking Kurakara. Won me so many games so far. I definitely recommend. Pankratops is probably by far the craziest card in the main deck because not only can you pendulum summon this card, but imagine you're playing against a deck like Super Heavy, right? Then your opponent has the whole board of like Regulus, Baron, Oppo for 3. Summon Pankratops, attack over Oppo, affect target Baron. Break the whole board. They still probably have like the Regulus there too, but just Pankratops is so crazy. It's just such an insane card. Highly recommend no matter what deck you're playing right now. And then last but not least, Fenrir. I think this card's just a 3 of in the main deck. I think it's so good because Droll is such an issue, right? So you start off your turn with Summon Fenrir in defense, if you're going first, of course. And then you can go ahead and just like normal summon Tiercer and go into Scarecrow. And then if they Droll you, that's fine. You can at least put up like a Baguska. So if they clear the Baguska, then they also have to deal with the Fenrir. And they just extended really awkwardly to deal with the Baguska. And now the Fenrir just kind of cleans up the rest of the turn for them. But the cool thing is that if they don't Droll you, then you can just go like Fenrir, add another copy of Fenrir, and then if you need a discard for, let's say, your Scarecrow, you can just like discard the Fenrir, right? A lot of times you're just going for like your scales to be able to pitch and then reborn, but there's still a lot of situations where you can go ahead and just like pitch a Fenrir, or at least keep Fenrir for follow-up. It does help you mitigate through a lot of situations where if you can't put up a lot of interruption, Fenrir is still a crazy interruption. Being able to banish something face down is definitely very good. And even if you're going second into a board, just being able to go summon Fenrir, of course, is just automatically insane. So let's talk about some siding options though. So I think that this is really important to talk about, especially these right here. Now, the Bishop is going to be really important for Branded and Math Mech. Now, the Gimmick Puppet Lock is definitely something that you got to be worried about. It's something that is going to be in the format. Of course, if the ban list bans it, hopefully it does, then there won't really be an issue. You'll still need Bishops for Branded and Math Mech, but it'll just be less of a problem, right? The other thing too is that you could side Bell as well. I think the card's very good too, but I think overall Bishops are still fine. You're already playing a lot of cards in the main deck that help you mitigate a lot of situations. You're playing like Ash, you're on Gamma that can help you if you're going second. You are on the Ogre, which is unironically not even that bad if you Ogre like a Cartesia or if you Ogre a Quem. A lot of different situations where even though Ogre isn't the best hand trap against Branded and you're probably siding it out, still not bad interaction. But you still have the Bishops, which I think are really important, especially if your opponent's on Math Mech, being able to get rid of the target for the Super Factorial, i.e. the Diameter. Or if you feel like they're going to go for the Conflict play, that's something where you can go ahead and just maybe Bishop the Sigma out of the grave so your opponent can't go for the easy rank 4. So that's something that's really important as well. You generically need Eccentric because this is a deck that can't play spells and traps, so you don't have like spell and trap outs. So this is going to be Eccentric as like an MST. You can also like normal summon it and deal with the monster on board too, which is pretty cool. The Kaijus and the other Kurakara, again, Pearly, Math Mech, this is something where even the Math Mech decks right now are summoning out the Singularity, or they're going into even the Arrival if they're playing like the Adignister package. So you definitely need Kaijus or Kurakara to be able to deal with that. Generically playing Nibiru, of course, is always going to be really good. A lot of people really are playing into Nibiru right now because many people just don't think that others are on it. And I think that's, again, when Nibiru becomes its best. So something that you definitely have to look out for. And then playing the Spell Canceller is just really good into Purely, into Super Heavy, into Branded. You might be asking why it's good into Super Heavy, and that's just because your opponent can't use Scales, and not being able to get to things like Prodigy is definitely going to be really crazy. So with this, we have to look at the extra deck and really know how this pairs with the side deck and our main deck. So looking here, we have the Saryuya. The Saryuya is really important because you have to Pendulum Summon into Genius Arrows to search Spell Canceller, and then you use the Saryuja to be able to summon out the Spell Canceller. I do like Saryuya because you're able to fix your hand and trade out extenders for more hand traps, which is really good. It's a difference between having 2 Bishops in hand and maybe like an Ash Blossom, or just like 1 Bishop, right? So drawing 4 cards is pretty absurd. Playing the Ballista, you can play Ballista or the Gigant. I don't know if you need both, but they still give you options, right? Because if you hard open the Gearbox, then you can overlay the Gigant with the Gearbox and then detach the Gearbox, add the Gearbox effect, add Tunneler. So it's just another way to unbrick your hand. Whereas the Ballista, you can go for a power play where if you have like a Soul Piercer on board, you can Peacemaker summon another Soul Piercer, then go Soul Piercer, Ballista, and add 4 cards at one time. So definitely a really cool option. Ballista and Genius are also another really cool option for the deck because if you summon your own Baguska, you can summon Ballista. Ballista makes something on your opponent's board 0, and then Genius negate another card, and then you can use Genius to run over the 0/0, so you effectively out 2 cards with both of these, and then you can like link off your Baguska into an Appaloosa and extend. You play the Saratobi here too. This card's really solid. It becomes an MST, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of situations too where you make this because it outs Baguska. So like if you summon Prodigy off like the scale effect and they have Soul Guy in hand, you can immediately go into Saratobi. Saratobi just run over Baguska and continue to play the game. So I think this is really cool as a Baguska out as well. You play the Stardust because you can use the effect of a Cell and summon Stardust, then immediately after this resolves, you can go ahead and Synchro Summon a monster. So you just go right into Baron, and then Baron's unaffected till the end of the turn, which is really cool too, because if your opponent goes to like Nibiru you in a weird spot where it doesn't really matter, you're not forced to negate Nibiru, and you still have your negate live for later on, which I think is really cool too. I know a lot of people are cutting the Stardust in favor of things like Boral Savage, but it's still something to think about moving forward, and I think that like these 2 cards together are just really crazy as far as trying to combo off. Then you also have the Merrymaker and Asargus that allows you to search the Regulus, and then it's also your key piece to going in for like a huge Zeus. So that's going to be something to think about as well. But overall, I think the deck is really solid. There's a lot to think about when it comes to breaking through a board without spells and traps and playing a deck again without spells and traps, which can be really awkward. But just really practice your lines of play and realize that the deck can do a lot more than just put up a big board. It can also play through quite a bit. So I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. And again, if you want to enter that giveaway, definitely go ahead and comment down below what your favorite deck is post Cyac and subscribe to the channel. We're almost at 17,000 on our way to 20,000. I'm so excited to be able to get there. So if you haven't already checked out my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or if you want a coaching session over at Medify, that's also all down in the description below. And I do hope that everyone has a wonderful night. Thank you.